Hello, I'm Stan Stalnaker with Hub Culture, and we're at the LA Pavilion, part of GetGlobal, an amazing conference focused on scaling companies worldwide. Joining me now are two very important and very interesting gentlemen from Latin America. Carlos Wong from Coyol.
This is me.
Free
I'm
Zone,
Carlos.
yes, in Costa Rica. And Isidoro Hodara from Zonamerica in Uruguay. So these are two free zones, free trade zones that are existing and very important and very rapidly growing Latin countries. Can you tell us why these zones have been set up in Costa Rica and Uruguay?
Well, in the case of Costa Rica, we opened this free zone in order to fulfill the needs of medical devices companies, where a company that is producing a catheter, a company that is producing a heart valve, contact lenses, also any product related to health, like breast implants and things like that, can operate and grow in Costa Rica. That's how we started. We started being a free zone specialized in medical devices.
Okay. And what about
In
Zonamerica?
our case, we had a tradition, historical and geographical, from even before we were a country, and that was a tradition of Uruguay as a transit trade country. So, translated into contemporary terms, that means we are a perfect spot for regional distribution centers. Not without trying to exaggerate, it's Rotterdam of the Southern Atlantic.
Okay, great. So very much a hub for
Very
this
much
kind of
so.
trade. So here at the Hub Pavilion, we've been talking about these sort of aspects of business and globalization through the lens of innovation. And in a weird way, these free zones are a relatively new and widespread innovation for drawing business into these markets and to help these companies actually expand their global footprint. So starting with you, how are you guys positioning the zone as a place for innovation for the companies that come to your zone?
Well, first of all, we have defined our values as a corporation, and one of the values is precisely innovation. Just let me go back for a moment to your introduction and say that this is not a recent development. Originally, free zones were created in Uruguay in 1923, and in the US in the 30s, and
Costa Rica in the 80s.
In the 80s, okay. So it's not a new fad. There are underlying reasons for free zones to become useful tools for development for the host country, for competitiveness, for the users or business partners, and for legitimate business for the developers of the free zones. And the fact that we are in the frontier, in the border between whatever happens in our countries, which is not necessarily all innovation, and what happens in the rest of the world, well, the demands for innovation and ever-changing circumstances put us in a bind. And we either adapt to the rest of the world, where our competition is, or we cease to be.
But we could argue that the modern free trade zone is really different than it used to be, right? Because you guys offer many more services and many more types of activities in these zones than the traditional, like, kind of demarcated free zone.
What
Is that right,
Certainly,
Carlos?
sorry.
What happened is that the trend in the competitiveness in the worldwide production makes the company to look to the best places to set up their distribution center, to set manufacturing center, services, operations. And so what you are seeing worldwide is an specialization by areas. So companies are looking to the best place in the Americas, best place in Europe, best place in the Asia, in order to do business, regionally speaking. For example, in Uruguay, they have strong regional distribution centers. In Costa Rica, they have strong manufacturing centers. So depending on what you do in the area, then and what resources you have, innovation goes around. In our case, we have a very strong innovation in medical devices. For example, in catheters, we have big centers that are working, particularly that we have 3 important companies with research groups that are doing innovation in these processes that employs probably 100 people just in research and development. Because there is a big concentration of company, it allows the research and the innovation that comes with that. If in terms of, for example, electronics, we have a very important lab from Intel in Costa Rica that is working permanently in innovation and creation of new processes.
So how does a company that's interested in bringing their operations into one of these locations go about doing it? Because you have now a lot of growth coming from China with companies going international, and it's not just, say, US companies that are looking to expand. You have Latin companies that are moving out of Latin America. How does a company go about getting set up in Zonamerica or in Coyol?
Well, they would first approach the developer and establish jointly the nature and dimension of their needs. One may need office space, warehouse space, lab space, and obviously the needs are different. The possibilities of accommodating those needs are different. And obviously it will have to be somehow related to the availability of human resources in that particular area. If you were coming to develop nuclear fusion in Uruguay, okay, we don't have that many human resources.
We're great for trade.
But we can do a lot in other areas, and we would try to build the best solution, the best proposal for the incoming business partner so that he can be relieved from anything, any other concern other than his core business. In a way, instead of being just infrastructure and services, we provide also something like a cultural bridge so that the European, American, or Asian company coming to Uruguay feels that it only needs to do what its business is, because we are trying to help them with
fill in the rest of the gaps. And Carlos?
In the case of Costa Rica, well, they can contact us as a developer, and we can also put them in contact with CINDE, which is the Investment Promotion Agency of Costa Rica. And between both, we work together to have the company install, have the buildings and the necessities that they may have, all of them under one single roof. This is what we call one-stop place, where they can have all the facilities in order to be ready to operate. And once they operate, we will help the companies through a package of services in recruitment, in business development, and all that.
And does a place like Coyol have special infrastructure that helps to make that more efficient, like maybe faster broadband internet, or obviously you talked about access to talent, but what are the other things in Coyol that make it so attractive?
We have several programs. We have, first of all, from the point of the employees, we have recruitment programs through a program that we call Integrate Coyol, which is a program that integrates the people to the companies. We have programs in order to get them in contact with logistics companies, with services companies that will help them to start and nurture them all the way through their growth.
Okay. What about with Zonamerica? With Zonamerica, are there any other special infrastructure things in place?
Okay. We pride ourselves to having the best possible infrastructure in terms of quality, availability, robustness, redundancy that is required for business. And that means connectivity, as you mentioned, and we have everything redundant so that critical operations never have a major disruption. We have 2 rings of fiber optics linking all the buildings in the park, 2 the energy generations are doing the same for every building. We have 2 data centers located in opposite sides of the park, so, should anything happen, we don't happen. And we even have, in terms of infrastructure, one building which won one office building, which won the best office building in the world award in Bloomberg's in 2011, I think it was.
Oh, that's quite an achievement. Both Costa Rica and Uruguay are beautiful countries, and they're relatively smaller than the other countries you might think of as Mexico or perhaps Brazil, even Argentina. And these are considered kind of global darlings in a way, these bigger countries. But the infrastructure in Uruguay and Costa Rica is actually quite good. And I'm curious, how do you position these markets relative to these larger countries to attract investment and to attract companies to come and set up with you?
I think that the most important is when you come to a country like us, you have a personalized treatment. And the advantage is that they're coming to our countries to operate worldwide. So it's not, sometimes people are coming to Argentina just for the Argentina market. When they're coming to Costa Rica or to Uruguay, I think that what they're going is worldwide. And so they're reaching lots of countries. And what we provide as developer is a process to accompany and to help the company to operate in our countries in a very successful way. So we reduce for them, first of all, the risk of starting up the business, because we're providing conditions in terms of infrastructure, in terms of robustness, redundancy, and in terms of facilitation of services that allows this company to operate in a country that reduces their long-term risk. So the startup of the companies is, in some way, surrounded by all positive factors. And that's a big difference with all these countries, because when they come to these countries, probably, well, you come alone and then, okay, who is going to be helping me? How do I make all this infrastructure? And at the end, they are just prepared for their own country market. What we do is we compete worldwide. So services are better, treatment is better, and in some way, we have a nicer country.
It is beautiful, Costa Rica, and the forests are incredible.
I might venture to say that in this respect, small is beautiful. Mm-hmm. If you want to name an Argentinian site or location that would compete with, say, Zonamerica or others, you would have a hard time to find it. Yes. And probably, I'm not speaking for him, but in his region, if you want to find in, say, Mexico, a site that would compete eye to eye with his free zone, it would be difficult to find it. And it's not only being small, but also being stable, and stable means politically and economically stable, and following the rule of law. These kind of things are more valuable to locate your next operation worldwide than a large domestic market, which you have granted in Brazil or in Mexico or in Russia. But not many people find that so attractive. They may find more attractive for this kind of thing a Baltic country than Russia. To talk about differences in regions.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting because if you look at Estonia and the idea of innovation and how a country can compete with a very large country, they have really at the forefront of digital identity and other ways to, they have an e-residency program for setting up businesses that makes it easier. So that's a very interesting kind of parallel. You do have the Baltics relative to a market like Russia, and then in the Latin region, you'd have sort of Costa Rica as a counterpoint to Mexico, and perhaps Uruguay to Brazil and Argentina. Is that how you guys see it?
Very similar. And all of that is based also in education of the people.
Well,
Something that distinguishes all of us is really that quality of people and that you're going to find in our countries, and that is a very significant factor that make a difference to others.
Yeah, so I think it's worth touching on the Uruguay experience because the president in Uruguay had initiated a really important education program that had provided internet access, public internet access, and other education initiatives to really turbocharge education. Is that?
It is true that the one laptop per child initiative was completed for the first time in Uruguay, before in any other country. But Uruguay has a tradition of reasonably good education for about 100 years, or even a little more. But let's say for about 100 years. Yeah. And you build on that. It's gradual. You cannot change that from one day to the other.
Education is not like a coin that you put it and it changes.
It takes a generation
through generations.
More of a,
But I think it's been very well noted and respected as a model for public education, because I think, as I understood it, Uruguay has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, and a lot of this came from these initiatives and investments that were made in public education over the last 10 years to really put it at the top.
For the last 100 years, at least.
That happened also similar in Costa Rica. We abolish army. We dedicate our resources instead of an army into education. So education is also a presence, a very important factor in our countries. Something that also is important is the penetration of the new multimedia systems, cellular systems. Costa Rica now distinguished because of that penetration of the social media and about the penetration of cellular-based type of systems. So that is creating in a country that not only is, we may call it bilingual, but also at the same time we may call it digital in that way.
Okay. So that, I think, sets up a really good closing question for us to kind of look at it, which is, where do you see these markets moving as we sort of go in towards 2020, and particularly the zones? Like, how are these zones evolving? You talked about infrastructure, you talked about the kind of welcoming nature of the talent that's there. What are you guys doing to get a step ahead of a world of free zones? And maybe Isidoro and then Carlos.
Well, I think that the trends are very clear. Every day, you need to be more specialized. You have to provide package of services that are dedicated to your customers. And every day you see more that level of one-on-one relationships. You see the persons, you see the medicines, everything is trying to become more tailor-made. That's what we are trying to do, and that's what we feel is the future.
And is the focus going to stay on medicine, or do you have other goals for things you want to build specializations for?
Our focus is studying the two most competitive sectors of Costa Rica. One is medicine or medical devices, as we call it, and the other one is related to services. There is a new division that we're putting up, which is to continue expanding in the services industries, particularly business-to-business operations, offshoring of operations, and inshoring of operations also. Right. This is a very fast-growing sector in Costa Rica too.
Okay.
And in our case, I think the expansion of the global services industry in Uruguay will be very important. We do have 2 free zones that are industrial in nature, just 2. And those are gigantic investments in the order of almost $2 billion for making cellulose paste from wood and exporting it. In one case at least, the owner, I think is a Finnish owner, derived all of its research in planting trees and developing new species to Uruguay. So it's not just manufacture. Outside the free zone, you have, the nursery of the trees and the biological mix to make species more productive and more efficient. And so you are moving towards services. Yes, the free zone is industrial, but the services attached to it are important. And in our case, where we now have roughly 50% in logistics and regional distribution, and 50% in services, most probably the percentage of services will grow.
Okay, great. So a 100-year legacy of free zones, but constantly evolving, and two very, I'd say, beautiful, but also very strategically competitive places in Uruguay and Costa Rica. I'm Stan Stalnaker with Hub Culture at the GetGlobal conference in Los Angeles. Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you very much.
And I hope